Welcome to the Tiny Gospel Radio Hour. We're going to be talking today with Ashley Goff, who is pastoring Arlington Presbyterian Church in Arlington, Virginia, which is a small church that's had a lot of interesting transitions over the last decade. Hey, Ashley, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, David.
Good deal. Pleasure chatting with you. Tell me a
Glad to
little bit
chat.
about yeah about the history of Arlington Presbyterian, sort of roughly when it
hmm
was founded, by whom, in what context.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so every Sunday in as part of our beginning of worship, we have a land acknowledgement, an acknowledgement of land. So APC is on the land of the Piscataway people. And so we say that we are settlers on occupied land. And so we remember the Piscataway people. So our land is Piscataway land. And then, about 100, we're on what's called Columbia Pike. So about 170, which is like one of the main commercial drags in Arlington County. 170 years ago, more than that. Anyway, this was farmland, right? So field fences, wagons. Columbia Pike was a main thoroughfare into DC. So this was all farmlands, working farms. So people would, you know, grow their crops, take them into the markets in DC, come back. So this also means that at that time this was enslaved land. So William Berryman was an enslaver, and he this used to we are literally on his land, his parcel of land, and he enslaved at least three people, two men and one woman in their early 20s. And recently we had a dedication acknowledging those three enslaved people through what's called the Remembering the Enslaved of Arlington, Memorializing the Enslaved of Arlington project, which is a project through the Arlington Historical Society of putting down stumbling stones throughout Arlington where their enslaved people live. So we now have three stumbling stones outside of Gilliam Place, honoring and remembering those three people. Um, Also on this land was after William Berryman was Philo Baldwin, who was an abolitionist. And after his wife died, as the story goes, he was basically he fled north because being an abolitionist in this part, um, he feared for his life. So we have the history too of Philo Baldwin of being on our land. And then in 1909, so this was Alexandria County actually at the time. And in 1909, that's when the trustees of Arlington Presbyterian Church bought this parcel of land from, I have their names here, Mary Gray and her husband Thomas Gray, Charles Gaddis and Eliza Gaddis. They were the heirs of the will of the late William Young. And the trustees bought this land from those couples, and one of them actually lived in Montana at the time, for $2,700. So the part of our work in remembering the three enslaved people was we actually have the deed to the sale from the sale of the land, which is kind of cool, pretty cool to have. So this is zero point 0.3 acres, on what was then Columbia Turnpike. Um, and yeah, and so June of 1909 is when that sale happened. And so the building was, that initial little country church basically was created. And then there was a fire in, I think, about 10 years later. Um, Basically, church almost like basically burnt to the ground. And so the congregation rebuilt built the church. And then it grew into what we now call the previous building that was demolished in um, basically 2016.
Right. And the previous building would have, I mean, as Arlington and the growth in the inner suburbs around DC, I'm assuming, was that building something that came at before the growth, or because there was just a
Yeah, I mean,
huge
so
explosion in that area? I
yeah,
mean,
so the
because it ain't rural no more.
Right. No, I mean the sanctuary, right, was built for a few hundred people. and it was filled, right? I mean, we followed the APC follows the trajectory of the main line, right?
Right.
So the heydays of the 50s and then the decline starting in the 60s. So um yeah, so we followed that trajectory. And the building follows that the size of the building follows the trajectory of that too.
Yeah, blossomed out, grew, became like reasonably substantial. Actually, back when Sharon was pastoring there, I
Uh-huh.
was in seminary. Um, Arlington Presbyterian is the place I preached my first sermon.
That's
Or
so exciting.
yeah,
Thanks for being
so,
part of our history.
yeah. I mean, a very tiny single Sunday part, but
Okay. Yeah.
and my wife and I, we lived in Arlington for years until we wanted to buy, and you can't buy much for $2,700
You
in
cannot.
Arlington right now.
You
Can't
cannot.
rent much for $2,700 right now.
You are
But we
correct.
actually lived on Ninth Street,
Oh, okay. In the
South
south
Ninth,
side or the north side? Okay.
South Side, right, just south, just the apartments are just south of 50.
Okay.
Arbors of Arlington, so
Okay.
right by the school, and
Hmm.
not quite walking distance from where you are.
Yeah.
So I do know that area pretty well.
Oh, great.
Um,
Good to know.
so the church grows. It follows the standard trajectory,
Yep.
and then reaches a point where a decision has to be made about future of the congregation,
Yeah.
utilization of the space. Um, Anything you can say about that, like
Oh,
that
yeah.
those guys is,
Lots to say about that.
or do we need more than an hour for that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, so I got to APC in 2018. So I tell the story, I'm telling you the story as it's been told to me.
Yes.
Um, and there are different starting points for this trajectory of the congregation, which I do love, and we have been intentional about that origin stories have more than one starting point. Um, so you could say, when Sharon Core was here, you know, mid 2000s, some I've heard 2008, they they just start to ask themselves these existential questions, David, of like, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Would anybody, if we weren't here, would anybody notice? What is the call right now? Um, and that sent them into a discernment process that basically lasted kind of a decade. And they did, a lot of those discernment tools that come out of the denomination. They had consultants. The over it 100% agreed the status quo was not working, right? Like we need to change. So that was in agreement. What that change was where the riff, a little bit of riff happened, a big riff happened. So they,
As typically does when you're making a very substantial shift in
yeah,
direction.
yeah, and they
About
were,
how large was the church at that time, or in terms of
um,
worship attendance?
yeah, I think you're talking a little over 100,
Yeah.
probably. And as I'm on your podcast now, we are a little micro church, tiny church. So, and that's part of the story too. So they start to ask them questions, but then they do all these processes and it definitely comes out like, oh, you want to change. And they're like, yes, dot, dot, dot. Like, what does that mean? Um, and the way that I've heard the story is when they really started to think about jettisoning themselves from the building. Like they knew they weren't broke. Um, so this was not a financial crisis. Like, oh my God, we need a bunch of money. We need to do something big. It really was about a sense of call and how are we showing up as neighbors in the neighborhood. So, but when they really started to think about jettisoning the building in some way, that's when, as it's been told to me, that's when the imagination just kind of erupted, that they could really think beyond the walls that were, as one person said, like, it was in squares, like the Sunday school room. There's a square. There's another square next to it that's a room. There's another square next to it. The sanctuary is a rectangle, right? I mean, literally, they were boxed into their thoughts. So when they imagined not being in this building in some capacity, then they really started to just jive with possibility. And for me, one of the crucial parts was them, and affordable housing was on their minds, right? Like, kind of like you said, what does $2,700 buy you? You can barely rent in Arlington for that. So they use the community organizing tool of going out and talking to neighbors. So, and that is just one of the most crucial parts for me of this story, right? This was not an intellectual process. It wasn't them just thinking through meetings. It was going out to the neighborhood, talking to neighbors, riding the buses up and down Columbia Pike, setting up the donuts on Saturday morning on a card table and catching people as they go by. And asking like basically like how are things for you? How have things changed in Arlington? And the overwhelming comment was, I can't afford to live and work in Arlington, and I want to be able to do both. And so
Right.
they'll say that broke their hearts. And for me, that really that heartbreaking drove the will and the call to do this, because this was a very stressful process. And it is not for the weak at heart. But having this sense of drive and call from the neighbors, which is what they were kind of asking for from the beginning of like, who are we to our neighbors? And having that focus was really, really crucial to basically creating Gilliam Place, which is a 173 unit affordable housing apartment building homes, 173 homes for neighbors. Um, so that, yeah, so they ultimately they sold the land they were on. The building wasn't worth much, but they
But
sold
the
the land to
land, that the land,
the
yes.
land churches are land rich, cash poor. So they sold the land to True Ground Housing, which is a nonprofit developer, real estate developer in the county. And in Arlington County, affordable housing, we don't have a housing authority like you hear in DC or even Alexandria. So all affordable housing is created by public and private partnerships. So they chose True Ground intentionally because of True Ground's own sense of mission and True Ground's own sense of connection with APC's own call to do something for the neighbors.
Hmm.
So that was a very important and intentional relationship. So True Ground came in, they blew the building down, demolished the building, and when I got here, the building was under construction. And we were worshiping at a Methodist church that the congregation had folded, but the building is like a block away. The building was being used as a community center, and we were worshiping in their chapel at the time. And so that's when I came on, is when the building was under construction and we were up at the Methodist church.
Right. And I mean, you can only feel free to delve in only as is comfortable, but you've talked about rifts within
Yeah,
the congregation,
yeah,
varying expectations about what that change was going to look like. What
yep,
impacts did that transition and the
yeah.
choice to follow that path have
Oh.
on the dynamics of community?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it was really hard because these are relationships of decades that were under a tremendous amount of stress, right? Like people didn't want to come to church because it was so stressful. Um, and those, I think, so it really was like the concept really around, I mean, I want to be kind when I say this, but the idolatrous nature of the building, in general, and that's for the church universal, right? The idolatrous nature that we have with our buildings, right? That this is what's going to save us. Um, and for there, a third of the congregation ended up leaving over this decision, and this was not what church is. And one John Etherton, who's a member here, he's told me the story of people telling him, at least one person, well, if there's no building when I die, where will people go for my funeral? And that's a very real emotional question. And John told me, and it's not enough to stop this process, right? That's a real thing, but it's not. And we want to care about that question and care about you. And we still, this is a call, and at one point, the people who were opposed tried to get the building designated as historical, which would have stopped the development process. So for me, it's like the congregation was suing each other. So they had to go in front of the Arlington Historical Preservation Board and make their case. And John Etherton gave a testimony, and he said, the call from God to create affordable housing is bigger than the building itself, so the building has to go. And I heard that in my when I was interviewing for APC, and I'm like, who are these people? Like who, like that sense of clarity and call. And everyone was telling them, David, they're going to die. Right? This is it. This is the dumbest thing you've got. National Presbyterian, Capital Presbyterian included, right? This is not ministry. They were told this is not ministry. And I'll be really clear now. We have that's a different relationship now with National Capital, right? Like that's of the past. So, but you're going to die. I remember going through like session minutes when I got here, and there's a whole set, the number of decisions that they had to make. I'm just looking at this, it was so magnitude, right, of these decisions. And someone from Presbytery came, it was like, you need to start thinking about closing. You need to start thinking about dying. And, in the minutes, it's like people push back, like, we're not ready, we're not there yet. But they really had to come to terms, David, with dying as a congregation. They
Right,
did not
because one option when you're stepping out of a building, and I think judicatories tend to press for this, is just distribute yourselves.
Yeah, go to Clarendon.
Yeah, exactly. You've
Which
got
would have been lovely.
Clarendon, you've got
I
First
love
Presbyterian,
Clarendon.
you got First Presbyterian nearby. You got there's all this stuff where you could distribute.
Yep.
But if a community has its identity and a strong sense
In
of
South Arlington.
in South Arlington, which is not North Arlington,
Is not.
I mean,
let's be clear.
It's still not. Still not.
Yeah. So go ahead, sir.
No, keep going.
Oh, yeah. So I also heard that in my interview process, that they really had to come to terms with dying and imagine their death and actually be okay with their death. Right. And they told me that we had to be okay and know that if we did die, we left 173 homes on Columbia Pike, and that's enough for us.
But
that was the
ready. But they weren't ready to do it right yet.
Nope, they weren't. But they weren't ready to die.
No, they wanted. They were willing to say, we are more than just this space.
Yeah.
We're this place, but we are not this space. And so part of that, I mean, often, like, if you're going to close, there are all sorts of constructive and gracious things you can do with your building and your space. But you're kind of nested in what they were called to do. Can you speak a little bit more about what the worship space looks like now and how that fits the dynamics of the community?
Yeah. I mean, so when a congregation really is called to do something like this, accepts that dying might be part of their story, there is a tremendous amount of freedom that comes from that dying, right? This was a type of death. And the amount of uncertainty that they lived with for quite a bit is really profound. And so when the congregation decided to come back into one of the retail spaces of Gilliam Place, right? And that's when I came in, is when I came in as a designated pastor, and my designated thing was to do the build out of our space. So we had 3,000 square feet. We're a renter. We do not own this space. That was an intentional thing. They did not want to have that ownership identity, and that what that does to us as owners.
So you're a storefront pastor.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's like Lincoln Street's right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, our work was to do a build out. And so we worked with local architects, the Garrett Group, and they were, they listened to us, and it's hard, David, right? When the other side, as we call it, when you're on the other side, to imagine anything really beyond what right? Like, and the architects helped us to do that. So we have 3,000 square feet. A chunk of that is our worship space. The other part is, my office, a little office next to me, a little conference room. We called it the conference room, and then COVID hit and no one has meetings anymore, right? So, and a little kitchen area. So it's a very homey feel. And the idea, when you walk in, what I told the architects was I want someone when they walk in, if they've never been to church, if they've been harmed by the church, um, they haven't been to church in bazillions of years, that they walk in and that there's a sense of connection, right? There's a sense of place. There's a sense of safety. And so they also, worked with us to create how our space feels. And also, we wanted to anticipate the bodies that were going to come through the doors. So all of our bathrooms are single use, right? Like if you're doing a build out, you're doing single use bathrooms. Like, so we're, and obviously we're ADA, right? So we're trying, there's a lot of different materials in the space. There's different types of flooring. We have wallpaper that's braille that actually reads words like joyful and happiness and peaceful. And there's different like modes of lighting, right? We can do something, we can manipulate the lighting. So it's anticipating the different types of bodies that were coming through. Like we have different chairs, right? I mean, ideally, I'd like 60 different chairs, David, to honor 60 different unique people, but we need to stack the chairs. So, but our chairs have gray brown, and a little bit of like kind of grayish blue. So I'm like, the chairs are non-binary. So I'm like, how do we have a theology of chairs, right? So we can really create a space that speaks to who God is for us now versus 100 years ago, right? Because 100 years ago, you can think about, like us right now, you're thinking about the now, right? And how could you even imagine 100 years down the road, right? So this is a very values-driven architecture holds value, right? So here's architecture now that speaks to who we are today.
Right. So you're putting a tremendous amount of thought and energy into the, like, what is the space going to be as a gathering, as an incarnate gathering of both those who have moved out of the chrysalis of their old space into this new place and welcoming new people in. You're very focused on sort of this enfleshed worship. This is 2018, 2019, and then it's 2020.
Yeah.
And you've just gotten that going. And
literally. Yeah.
How did that impact the dynamics and sense of community when COVID landed and you found worshiping right all this thought of incarnate all of a sudden doesn't quite work? How did that impact? You'd already gone through a huge transition, and then suddenly you have this other thing. What was the effect of that on your community?
I mean, I remember, right, March 2020 everything gets shut down, January and February. I remember thinking like, how do we do this? Like, right, we knew, again, it's like, what you don't want to do. We're not going to come in, we're not programming for the building, right? We want to be neighbors. We want to build relationships. We just want to be people. We want to build community. And yeah, I mean, this has always been a place for me where, it's like, how are we going to do this?
Again, you've gone through this huge thing. You haven't died, and there's this sense of we're going to begin something new. And you've been there 3 years, which is it's not bad, but it's still early in a ministry arc. And so, all of a sudden this.
So identity and purpose, like, this was such a hard journey, right? There was a lot of healing that needed to be done, just like in their own, like, they're not on alert anymore, they can just settle. So identity, purpose, vision, what are we doing? And so we were kind of getting started. March 2020 hits, we all go home, but if there's any congregation that's able to pivot, it is this congregation, right? So we go online with everybody else. I mean, what's so helpful with our space is that my colleague Abby and I, she's our minister of music, our minister of arts and community engagement, our minister of music. I mean, we can set up the camera right in front of us, right? I mean, it's like I'm in your living room. So we weren't in some big pulpit in some cavernous space with the camera like 100 feet away. So there was a certain sense of intimacy that we could pull off with virtual worship. So, right, and how do we pull forward the tools that the congregation used to create Gilliam Place into the now, right? So listening was one of those key things, listening to your neighbors. So how are we listening in COVID? So I'm still like, one thing I did when I got to APC and the question, I'm like, how do I do this? I don't have many colleagues who are in my same position, David. I don't have many people I can call up and be like, how did you do this? But what I knew how to do was community organizing. And so I knew how to do one-on-one relational meetings. So in my first 18 months at APC, I did like 150 meetings with people, mostly in South Arlington, right? So some of those came back during COVID when everyone is trying to figure out kind of like how to support neighbors, because instantly people can't pay rent, food situations, right? The hospitality industry. Anyway, people are losing jobs. I mean, the whole thing. So, I end up having a conversation with folks at True Ground, with some nonprofit that does work along Columbia Pike, and runs the farmers market that's on Sundays down the street. And we, basically what we end up doing is APC pays for 90 boxes every Sunday of farmers market food to get delivered into the garage because we didn't know how to distribute things safely. This is pre-vaccine. And so we end up having this food distribution in the garage before worship on Sundays with 90 boxes of, fresh farmers market. So people would come down, everybody's masked, they'd stand in line. Eventually what happened was like, we'd been collecting like the toilet paper and the paper towels. We had all this stuff.
Yeah.
So we created a store. It was called the store. We would push our tables out because every bit of furniture is mobile in here. Pushed some tables out into the parking garage, put stuff on it. We, masks, toilet paper, soap, like we would get donations. I would go buy stuff, and so you would come pick up 3 items from the store, 3 or 4 items, and you would go right across to the parking spots, get your box of food and head back upstairs.
And
And
toilet
so
paper. Toilet paper
toilet
was a
paper,
precious thing. It was a precious thing for a while
yeah.
there.
So we create community in a parking garage, David. So right, so here again is you're taking a space that's supposed to be used for something else, parking a car, and now we've created it into a space that is relational and communal and purposeful. People are getting food. So, but we started to see people every Sunday. So that started this, the relational work. So I'll stop there. I got something else to say, but I'll stop there.
Well,
Pause.
what else do you have to say?
Oh, okay. Well,
You can go. You
we
can
are
go.
now a wealthy congregation. We got 8.2 million for the sale of the land. That is in basically a trust fund with National Capital. So we have an MOU with National Capital that says that how much we can take per year out of that, the proceeds from the sale to help supplement our budget. So we're a wealthy congregation now, and we are a micro tiny church.
And how do you,
So,
and the question there, I'll let you keep going, but to consider, how do you keep from becoming a zombie church?
well,
Meaning a church that is animated by an endowment,
yeah,
but doesn't have a sense of calling or mission
yeah,
other than to continue to exist.
yep,
So I'll let you keep going, but just to put that in your ear.
yeah. And I think in the United States of America, there are a lot of churches who have enough money to just keep sucking for a long time. David, like, how are we not that, right? You just keep using your money to just stabilize status quo. So we realized, you know, so basically we got 8.2 million. Well, at that point it was around 6 because we did $1 million build out and all this stuff. But anyway, we got a lot of money. And people upstairs are like, I need $50 for my rent. And I'm like, okay, I got $50 over here, $200 requests. I've got 6.5 million. That is killing my brain. I don't know what to do with this. And COVID really forced this in a way. We will never say COVID was a blessing, but we grew Like we expanded ourselves. So what we ended up doing, we knew we needed to create what we now call a new money story with our wealth, and we needed to have a new type of relationship with our wealth. So we got the Vandersall Collective is a consulting firm that works with congregations they'll do your stewardship campaign, they'll do capital campaigns. And we went into a relationship with them to help us to create a money story. So one of the first things we did was we had a retreat with Session and like our key money people. And one of the first questions that Mika and Aaron, our two consultants, asked us was, "What's your first memory of money? What's the story?" They're not great. It's a lot of shame. It's a burden that people are still carrying with them. And when you get 10 people around a table, David, with 10 individual money stories that we're not aware how we are acting out of them, that's a challenge. And I'm not speaking just to APC, that is across the board, right? So how do we create a collective story about money, being aware of how we have been practicing money in our past? And that was like, for many of us, it was like, you know. So what Aaron and Mika realized quickly was we don't have any core values. So
around wealth and the use of
just,
mammon,
yeah,
or any core values.
any core values in general, but there's no core values that are driving how we see how we're called to use our money and our possessions in our space. So what we did is, and this is again, like we're still in COVID, we're still on Zoom. So after worship for three different Sundays, we had a question that we asked people to tell stories about. So the first question was, what makes you feel alive at APC? And it was, all right, so you tell a story about now, not the past, not about a movie, or not even something aspirational, but now. The second question was around change, like how have you seen change in the congregation? Tell a story. And that's when we got into like, now we're more nimble. Now we can make decisions, without being burdened by a building and waiting around for the next flood and wondering how we're going to pay for it. The last question was a little bit more aspirational, but it was like, our collective power comes from God. How do we build more of it? What's the story behind building more power? Which is the ability to act. So someone in our congregation, in her day job, works in philanthropy, and she did in evaluation. And so Liz and so we're telling these stories and there's people just taking notes, right? Liz takes all the notes and you can create data out of stories. And so she created data, and that data created our core values. So we came up with, I hope I can get them: relational, communal, inclusive, prayerful, place-based, transformational, and justice-focused. And those are our core values. And we have little definitions, and then we have like kind of sub-values after them. But what Aaron and Mika did was they put the core values in an Excel document. And now we have what we call our strategic filter. So with our budget, with anytime anyone wants to use our space, any decisions about money. We just moved Abby, our, Minister for Arts and Community Engagement, from 30 hours to 40 hours. We will say we run it through the filter. So for our budget every year, after we do all of our work, but before we talk about numbers, David, we run it through the filter. So is the budget relational? Is it communal? Is it inclusive? Is it justice focused? And then we're like, why? If it's a yes or a no, right? But this is a yes or no thing. And so that tool has created such a sense of identity and purpose and a collective money story, right? We also did other things. Like we did a whole Lenten series on what does the Bible say about rich and poor. Yeah, so and then we use the curriculum that the Sanctified Art has, that the Vandersall Collective created with Sanctified Art, called Our Money Story. And we actually came back to that this spring because we have all these new people. And so now we need to get everybody, we need to go back to this language, back to the stories. Um, and that filter, particular for me as a leader, has been transformational because now we're having values-based conversations around money rather than personal preferences.
Right. Right. So as you're coming, you've got this coalescence of the community around and the congregation around this particular set of values that more accurately reflects your current
Yeah,
place, your current identity.
yeah.
Um, you talk about new people. So
Mhm.
as the congregation has changed, it's in a different location, it presents differently, and it's structured to welcome people in. You're still small,
Yep.
but the identity is shifting. What sort of new folks are joining? What's drawing people to Arlington right now?
Yeah. Um, I mean, you want to be part of the story, right? You want to be part of a congregation who's done something like create Gilliam Place and has, is still called to engage, to build community and respond as a neighbor. So the sense of our very place-based, I think people feel called to be here because of our sense of place, right? We are very, like, our focus is Gilliam Place and South Arlington. We don't have 1,000 things going on, right? We're pretty lost.
You can't have it. The great thing about being small is that you really can't. You
Yep.
just can't.
You just can't. And people really want to do things in a relational way, right? Because that's one of our core values. So it's not about programming for people or, it's about how do we get food out into the community, right? How um, you know, we do stuff. There's a lot of folks in our building with disabilities, right? And there's a nonprofit that does work with adults with disabilities who are in Gilliam Place intentionally because of the work to for adults with disabilities to be as independent as possible in affordable housing. So we're doing work with our stomping ground. We have food distribution on Mondays through Arlington Food Assistance Center, right? We got them to come on site now, so back to food distribution. Food's just huge. So, I mean, I think people are called to these kind of um, micro movements, micro work, but they're very relational. So, I mean, and also one thing that is part of our values, and as a student of improv, we'll say we act to discover what is next. So we don't sit here and like overthink shit.
Yeah,
It's like, let's try it. And if it doesn't work, then we'll figure out plan B or we don't do it or something else. So it's like when I hear a response, there's something, I mean, that I feel like, oh, we could do something about this, from the neighborhood, then, I bring it and we're so low barrier.
yeah,
We have no barriers in this space, David, right? There's no thresholds literally physically keeping you out of here. So I think that's part of the attraction too. And you want small. I mean, if you want big, you're not going to be here. You
right,
don't like more light Presbyterian, you're not going to be here. Um, so, we're kind of a little specialty place,
right,
I'll say.
right. And as I mean, you've had other ministry experience in other contexts, in larger contexts.
Hmm.
Um, Size and adaptivity, the
Yeah.
processes that you have now in the community as it stands in Arlington Presbyterian, how does that aid your capacity to be more responsive and adaptive to an emergent need?
Yeah. I mean, so I'm still doing one-on-ones, right? I'm still out in the community. Abby's out in the community. Um, we meet with people. So I mean, because it's about the values, right? It's not about our systems or our bureaucracy that is holding us together. It's our values and the sense of place and the call of, us being here still. Um, And the real, they blew the building down in order to not have this barrier of relationships. And so people really people in the community really trust us. I mean, this is like a lot of capital that you have as a congregation to do something like this. People are like, oh, they're serious. So serious people then look for us to do very cool things, right? Like the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, our prosecutor came to us because they want to host expungement clinics, right? We do these twice a year now. And so people come who have something of a charge from 20 years ago
Hmm.
that's just lingering around, keeping, impinging upon employment, renting. And, we're hosting, but basically the county's running an expungement clinic in our space. And and so we're invited into things, because of what people see as our deep commitment to South Arlington. And so we consistently show up, I think, because um, we're consistent in how we show up. We don't take on more than we can do. And when you're consistent and when you do what you say you're going to do,
And you've been in a place for a long time and you're clearly deeply committed to
yeah,
that community, it
yeah,
makes a difference.
it
Those
makes a total difference.
having those roots run deep,
Deep.
and
Yeah.
people can see that, perceive that,
Yeah.
and having permeable boundaries makes a big difference. The community
That
flows through you.
That's literally one of our value. I mean, that's part of our place-based values. That word is in there, permeability, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it says like we don't have the big red door anymore. And they had this big red door as in one of their entrance points, and the thing would lock. It would lock by itself, David. Like it was so symbolic of like the building itself that like they couldn't unlock the door and it would just lock on its own. And they're like, we have no idea what's going on at this door. Like, and they couldn't get it, they couldn't fix it. No one wanted to fix it. So yeah, I mean, I think, and I mean, I still think the book of Acts is like the story of APC, of this early church, small micro church, trying to act to discover what is next, living in the wake of the Spirit, being like, oh, this is happening. Okay, now we'll do this. Oh, that's over there. Now we'll respond to that. Oh, this person's hurting. Okay, we need to do this, and paying attention to the world, and how God is showing up in Acts has some pretty wild stories in it. And I mean, this is a pretty raw and wild space. And like I feel like I'm living the clergy dream over here because I just get to be in these raw emotional, real moments with, I mean, I've got, 300 people above us, and that's another level of the congregation for me. Um, South Arlington is another level of the congregation for me. So it's not just the 25, 30 people who show up on Sundays. I get to be a pastor in the community, and like that's a real privilege and gift.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Ashley, anything
Mhm.
else you'd like to share or touch on, or that's stirred in your spirit as we've been talking before we get close to wrapping up?
I drive around when I'm driving around, especially in Northern Virginia, and I see these big churches with big parking lots, David. I think could have been a apartment building.
Yeah,
You
it's
could
a
get an apartment building on that parking lot. Some of these you can get two. It could have been an apartment building and still could. And the Commonwealth, Housing Coalition that we've been a part of through Voice, which is our community organizing network that we're part of, got passed a faith and housing bill this past winter, which allows it basically has rezoned every congregation in the Commonwealth to be able to create affordable housing, right, in their local jurisdiction. And so it got rid of a zoning law, basically, that you had to get rezoned. If that, like, we did not have to get rezoned because we were already in commercial space. But those zoning fights are brutal. And NIMBYs will go down with the Titanic to keep affordable housing out of their neighborhoods. So I want to end with the sense of possibility, that this is a dying denomination, like all of the mainline denominations are dying. And this has been our resurrection. And it's just an incredible gift to be able to live with a sense of freedom. And
And
that,
freedom and purpose and
yeah,
this and a vision that is clear
real
and
call. Yeah.
evolving. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, we're just, yeah. And, you know, I don't want to sound like a cheerleader. You can do this. Like these are hard, they're long. You don't do it for the money, but we are a wealthy congregation now that we can use our wealth for transformation and upend systems of harm. And, you know, it's you could to transform your space into something that's relevant for the community. Not that, this is our story. It's not everyone's story, but transformation is pretty much our story.
Good.
And we came
Transformation.
out,
Yeah.
uh,
Keep going. Keep going.
yeah, no, I mean, Don Peebles, one of our members who's now moved to Richmond, when he sat down in one of our green chairs out there, David, the very first time, and he said, 10 years ago, if you told me this is what it was going to be, I never would have believed you. And that that is that will stay with me. But that, right, resurrection doesn't look what we think it's going to look like, right? We know that because of the stranger on the road. We know that because of the gardener, right? We know that because of the locked room. It's not going to be the same, and yet there is an essence that is the sameness of these Jesus stories, right? So, and the disciples were right. I am afraid, and that's okay.
And
So I'm saying this
it's a
as a
little
like,
overwhelming. Yeah.
yes, right?
Yeah.
You know, but like, I don't know, I think as a church, like you can live in such a different body than what we're doing now and have so much more joy and life and connection than what our buildings are basically prohibiting us from having.
Yeah. As a church that's living into its resurrection body, it
Yeah.
seems to be a joyous place to be, Ashley.
It is. No, it's so lovely, right? I adore the small. I'm called to small, right? So, and people who are here are called to the smallness too, because the world is kind of a big, nasty place.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a place where you can come and feel safe.
Which we all need. Sanctuary is kind of
Mm.
a good place to be. Well,
Yep.
Ashley, I've definitely appreciated the time you've taken today.
Thanks,
We'll chat a
David.
little bit after we wrap up, but
Okay.
this has been Ashley Goff on the Tiny Gospel Radio Hour. I hope you have been informed by it, and be blessed until next time.